morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today's first story is a total Trojan horse. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to get you to let me into your attention span with an X-Men headline, but then bam, I'm going to surprise you with a story that's really about an emerging screenwriter. All right, so let's get started. So the glamorous headline is about Gambit, the X-Men movie coming from Channing Tatum, his dream project, being delayed. And so this was a big headline that everyone reported yesterday, that Doug Liman, and the way it came about is that Doug Liman has accepted another directing gig in the interim. So he's like, I'm going to direct this movie first for Amazon, and then I'm going to direct Gambit. So everyone's like, geez, you're pushing this back again? It has no set release date at this point, but I think the takeaway from that was Gambit's even further away than we thought. So with Gambit, it's currently in the middle of some rewrites. Although word is that the script is quite good, that's the buzz about it, but they're tweaking it a little bit. I suspect, I saw some stories saying it was for Doug Liman's liking, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was for Channing Tatum's, because his business partner really, Reed Carolyn, is doing the rewrites. And Reed Carolyn's actually a pretty talented guy. I think that he and Channing Tatum are doing some exciting stuff together. I actually have a lot of faith in them as a creative team, largely based on the Magic Mike movies, which were, their babies. And the Magic Mike movies, both of them, turned out better than they had any right to. So the fact that they were able to elevate that material to that level, I think shows an impressive amount of talent and I think business savvy. So I'm excited to see what they do with Gambit. I'm very excited about Channing Tatum's Gambit. And if it takes its time, fine, as long as when it gets here in the best shape possible. Also, you might recall that Chris Claremont was working on that script. Chris Claremont, a famous X-Men writer, the X-Men writer actually, basically like him and Grant Morrison to some degree are like the most famous X-Men writers. But if you've read a recent Chris Claremont comic, it's horrible. It's absolutely almost unreadable. And so I would be very nervous about any script that he wrote. I think it's wonderful that he did the first pass, but I definitely would hand it over to somebody else to tweak. So that's what Reed Carolyn is doing right now. And also, there's some question as to whether or not Leah Seydoux from the recent Spectre movie, they all start with an S, whether or not she's going to, the most recent Bond movie, if she's still going to play Belladonna. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think she's kind of perfect casting for Belladonna visually, but I think that she didn't really bring a lot to the table with Spectre, and so I don't know if she really has the energy that one would want for a Gambit movie, right? I mean, Gambit should have a lot of, excitement and energy, and I think that Leah Seydoux has proven to be a bit of a low energy talent. So anyway, that's how Gambit's coming about. So let's talk, though. Get ready for the switcheroo. Let's talk about this project that Doug Liman is going to do instead. Now, this would never generate any search traffic, but it's such a great story that I think a number of you are going to be very interested in, that I think you'll be happy that I Trojan horsed you. All right, so Doug Liman is going to direct. Now, Doug Liman, of course, fabulous director, directed Swingers, then went on to do like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and even though he's had a couple of movies that didn't turn out so well, he's really on a hot streak right now. He did Edge of Tomorrow, fantastic job with that movie, and he has another. It's Mina. It's the movie about a drug runner that Tom Cruise is playing. They're teaming up again. But what's interesting about it is that this was like a very small subplot in the Narcos show on Netflix. So it's funny to see two people at the same time visiting the same material. But anyway. And he was such a small character in Narcos, it's funny that someone decided to make an entire movie about him. All right, so Doug Liman, he's made those movies, and now he's getting ready to do Gambit. Fantastic choice. But so he's decided in the interim, because he has this break, to do a very small movie for Amazon. I think it's going to be Amazon, probably, it's their first spec acquisition for a movie, and I think it's probably going to be their first original film. And it's a very low budget movie. It's $5 million. It's called The Wall. And this is where things get really interesting. So it's a very small movie. It's not only low budget, but because it's so small, Doug Liman's able to do it in a very quick turnaround amount of time, so he can squeeze it in before he has to go work on Gambit. So what it's about a sniper and his spotter, an American sniper and spotter who are pinned down by an Iraqi legendary sniper, and they have to defeat him and get free. So as you can see, It's like a high concept idea. It seems something that would interest mainstream audiences, but it's incredibly low budget. So it's a very savvy script right there, and that, it's something that plays, like a blockbuster or something at least going to get people's attention, but at the same time, it's incredibly cheap and easy to make because it basically takes place in just like one location. So very clever writing on that part. Now, as you can see, this is written by Dwayne Worrell. I have his picture up here. He is, a black screenwriter, and this is a really great case of more diversity behind the camera, just solely based on talent, which I think is absolutely wonderful. No diversity program gave Dwayne Worrell a job. It was actually just widening the scope, the talent search scope. So how did that happen? Well, Dwayne Worrell was actually teaching English in China when he wrote this script, and he had no Hollywood connections, but someone said to him, hey, this was back in 2014 is when Amazon acquired this, and they said, Amazon's looking for scripts, movie scripts, and they have open submissions. You should submit. Obviously when you submit to anything like this, you have to sign a waiver saying you won't sue them because if they make a movie that's similar to yours. That's industry standard, by the way. Amazon isn't trying to rip you off. That's industry standard when someone takes a look at something without you having representation. Anyway, he submitted, and what do you know? Amazon acquired the script. They purchased it. It was the first spec script they ever bought, and that gave Dwayne Worrell a really good introduction to Hollywood. So he went from having no connections in Hollywood to his script climbing to the top of the blacklist and getting major representation. He's currently repped by CAA. I don't know if they immediately repped him. I would imagine they did. That's a pretty high-profile gig to land. So even though The Wall is only being made now, and that's the first script he ever sold, he is still getting other work, actually. And for instance, one thing that he just sold in August was a pitch to Warner Brothers called Dante's Inferno, and it's about Dante, our hero, having to go through the 9 circles of hell to save the woman that he loves. So it sounds like some kind of Roman sandals, epic. So I think that's pretty interesting, and I think it's really a great example of how the digital landscape continues to change old school Hollywood. And Dwayne Worrell was able to write a great script. He was very smart about the script that he wrote. Then he was very smart about what he did with it. He should really thank that friend for telling him about the Amazon submission process. And then now he has representation, and he's a major Hollywood player who's on his way up. And I think that Doug Liman directing his movie is only going to further up his profile. So very exciting and a really good snapshot into how Hollywood works today. So that's the first story of the day, and now on to the second story of the day, which also has to deal with diversity, actually, and something that seems like colorblind casting from J.J. Abrams. And J.J. Abrams is working very hard, obviously, to have diversity in Hollywood. He's kind of made it like his mission. He did that with Star Wars quite successfully, and he said, after the Oscars So White controversy, that Bad Robot is going to be a front runner in trying to bring more diversity in front of him behind the camera in Hollywood. So he's making good on that promise with the movie he's putting together, another low-budget sci-fi movie, which some people think might be another Cloverfield film, after, of course, the very solid success with 10 Cloverfield Lane. I wouldn't call it a runaway success, but as I said when I was talking about the box office for that movie, it's definitely a brand that's worth continuing with, maybe if not investing more money in. But this is going to be another low-budget sci-fi film, and it looks like J.J. Abrams is going with colorblind casting, which is very exciting, although I think it's important to remember that he did this before with Undercovers. You might remember that show that he did about some CIA husband and wife ex-CIA agents, and they were pulled back into the field, and it was written for actually 2 white actors, and J.J. Abrams decided to cast 2 black actors, one of them being Gugu Mbatha-Raw in one of her earliest roles. But the show never gelled, it never found an audience. Maybe it was too early because, of course, there's a lot of shows doing very well right now with black leads, but this one just didn't connect. But he's trying again with Gugu Mbatha-Raw, and so she's been cast in this movie called God Particle, at least that's what it's being called now. Will it be called Cloverfield Particle? Who knows? But then also, the reason it was in the news is that David Oyelowo just joined the cast. Perhaps best known, Lee Daniels gave him a lot of work. But The Paperboy, The Butler. But what really put him on the map was Ava DuVernay's Selma, where he played Martin Luther King. Fantastic job in the movie, very good actor. But still, both of these actors I think are getting a lot of work, but they're still on the cusp of breaking through. Mbatha-Raw, of course, infamously now, did not get that Star Wars role after all. But JJ did not forget her, and he's cast her in God Particle. Now, what's it about? It's about a team of astronauts who make a horrifying discovery. You know the drill. And there's some kind of particle that they discover that causes them to have to fight for their lives as it makes them question the fabric of reality. Yeah, that sounds kind of Cloverfield-y to me, so we'll see how it turns out. I think that it'll be very interesting to see, if the film, if it's two black leads, how will it be viewed? It will be viewed as a quote-unquote black film. Hopefully we're moving away from that. I think even if not, no matter what happens in terms of how it's perceived, I think this kind of a sci-fi film, not After Earth, Will Smith's movie with his son Jaden tried to do this, but of course the film just was considered not good. But I think that, to broaden the horizons, even if it's still considered a black film of what a black film is, I think is very important. And I'll be curious to see how the rest of the cast shakes out. And, also they had that Halle Berry Extant television show on CBS recently that this will have to try and, make itself feel different from. But I think it's very exciting, and let's hope that JJ, I'm glad he's continuing to do this, but I hope he continues to do it in a smart way. All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is actually about Alec Baldwin's podcast, Here's the Thing, where he had Cary Fukunaga on as a guest. And Cary Fukunaga is not making a lot of friends in Hollywood. As you might recall, he dropped out of the remake of Stephen King's It, with New Line being like, I don't like the way this movie's coming together, or you changed my budget on me, etc., etc. And he's very difficult about it. And so now he's getting into a fight with Netflix. So he goes on Alec Baldwin's podcast, and Alec Baldwin's like, how'd you feel about Beasts of No Nation and how that turned out? And Cary Fukunaga basically just calls Netflix out. He's like, yeah, you know why we didn't get any Oscar nominations and why Idris Elba was snubbed? Netflix. And he said, no one takes Netflix seriously in the industry. Nobody wants to vote for it. They think it's just a TV movie. And then he went on to say that Netflix made the situation worse by not running an aggressive enough campaign. And then Alec Baldwin's like, well, do you feel like you and Netflix have come to terms with what happened? And then Cary Fukunaga's like, no, I don't think we've had a real follow-up conversation. And it's like, what? Netflix paid a lot of money for Beasts of No Nation. Cary Fukunaga decided to take that money and roll the dice, and I think it's just as much on him as it is on Netflix. Now, he's saying that Netflix didn't ask him about how to run the campaign, didn't take his advice, but he knew he was first up at bat. He had to know there would be a learning curve, and I think that it's really a bad idea to badmouth previous business partners. I mean, Hollywood's a small town, and I really wouldn't call Netflix out on that kind of stuff. I think the better thing to say would be, it's a shame that people are not, some of the Academy voters are not fast enough to pick up on the digital revolution that's happening, and I'm hoping that with the voter rules that are changing, that will go away, because, they're missing a lot of great work. That's what you say. But apparently Cary Fukunaga doesn't have a publicist to walk him through these things, or the publicist is just like, I can't control him, all right? But I was really, really surprised about that. Now, it also is interesting, though, because Nate Parker's Birth of a Nation got a huge bid from Netflix. Netflix actually bid the most for that movie out of Sundance, $20 million. But Nate Parker took $2.5 million less, that's really nothing, from Fox Searchlight, because they distributed 12 Years a Slave and, obviously ran a very successful awards campaign for that film, and they just have a better relationship with Academy voters. I can understand what Nate Parker did, and I can understand what Cary Fukunaga initially did, and that's just the way you play the game. You have to decide what's more important to you. And Cary Fukunaga just had the misfortune of being first. I also think, as I said when I reviewed that movie, it had Beasts of No Nation. It had some problems. It was incredibly unlikable, distasteful, I guess you could say. And while I understand that it depicted something that actually happens, I think it did so in a manner that was a little bit off-putting. I think that it wasn't like a slam dunk, I guess what I'm saying, for nominations. It wasn't like Creed, which I felt was more deserving. Although I do feel, everyone said Idris Elba should have gotten nominated, but honestly, I think that Netflix should have really had a campaign to get Abraham Atta nominated, because he, I thought, was the real standout performance. And the monologue that he has at the end to that social worker was really phenomenal. And if they had just sent that around to all the Academy voters, I think he probably would have gotten nominated. All right, so anyway, that's the third story of the day. Now on to the viewer question from Lex Sum. And Lex, he says, Grace, silly question. Not a silly question. I like this one. So Lex said, do you think it's ever possible for a movie to have two directors? For example, a movie as big and as far away as Justice League Part 1. Would it work? And if not, why? Would oversight be enough? Please take the question seriously, and I hope you will consider answering. And then a ton of cute emojis. I did take it seriously, and I am answering it. And I think it's a great question, and I see where you're coming from, Lex. I think Lex is talking about a lot of fans hoping that maybe somebody would come on and balance out Zack Snyder. You know, Zack Snyder, people feel, is very good with visuals, but his storytelling skills need some work. Now, I liked Batman v Superman, but I think you can't deny that the reaction, and while I think that it's I said like a 60-40 split, 60% positive reaction to the movie. You can't deny the 40% and the media, large part of the media who did not like it. So something has to be done. I think that, and I think when Lex says oversight, I think he's talking about studio oversight. I think it's interesting that people are trying to blame Warner Brothers. I saw some people ask me about this as well and say, do you think Warner Brothers edited the crap out of this movie and made it a disaster? And I don't think that's true. I do not believe that to be the case. I think the film worked. So I think there is a perspective where you're like, it's great. And I think that's where Chris Terrio and Zack Snyder and everybody at Warner Brothers was coming from. Although I can't believe, they must have tested this for audiences. I'm surprised that these problems didn't come out in advance. But anyway, we'll see what happens when we get the director's cut on the Blu-ray release. And that'll answer that question for sure. But anyway, that's what everyone's talking about. So here's my answer. I think you can't have two directors on a project, as like the Wachowskis, for instance. And there are lots of actual, for instance, it's usually siblings who direct together, the Hughes brothers, etc. I think it's difficult when you don't have people who work together a lot, right? I think that's the problem. So what I would actually do is probably put a stronger producer on the film. Right now, Charles Roven, all due respect to him, I think he kind of takes a step back. I think that it's really Zack Snyder who's really, driving this. And I think, unfortunately, his producer is his wife. And I've talked about this before. I think wives as producers is horrible. Christopher Nolan has the same situation. I don't know what these women do, but they obviously don't correct their husbands or try to make the movies better, right? They almost seem to me to be like an extra vote for their husband at the bargaining table, or when decisions are being made, to help sway the decision and the direction they want to go in. I don't see these women having their own creative voices and contributing beyond, just supporting their husbands as directors. So I would be like, you know what, Zach, I think you're good, and I'm glad that Deborah works for you and helps you make movies, but we need an independent, really strong-minded producer to come in here and, fix things up and make sure that you guys are really being held accountable and to task, and maybe looking out a little bit for some of the problems you've run into. Because, when you have two directors, unless they're used to working together, it's really, I think it's not professional, and I think, it doesn't work out so well. I wouldn't do it. I think unless the directors want to work as a group, it just is, it's unprofessional and it's inappropriate, and just, I don't think anybody would ever agree to it. But that doesn't mean that you can't have, filmmaking is a team effort. It's not just the director or directors who are in charge. It's supposed to be the director and the producers who are making those kinds of decisions. That's why there are so many people involved in a movie. So get someone on there. I would bring in perhaps somebody else. Warner Brothers still has no Kevin Feige. And look at this. Star Wars has Kathleen Kennedy. Marvel has Kevin Feige. They've said it's Zack Snyder, the Snyderverse, but clearly that's not a good role for him. He's not working in that role. And they need someone who isn't a director, who isn't in the middle of making a movie, and someone who can step back, look at things from a business perspective, and really make sure that this thing is running smoothly. So I continue to feel that that's what Warner Brothers needs. They need someone in charge of their DC movies who is not making the movies, and is just someone whose sole purpose in life is to make sure that the DC Cinematic Universe is good and pleases the fans and gets good reviews and is on track and is something that is a plus for the studio. So let's see how long it takes them to do that, if they ever do it. All right, so that's my answer to your question, Lex. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.